Happy Thursday, Buckeye fans. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. This is the Austin Birm Show, and this is the recruiting show, Talking Stuff. I am going to be joined once again by Lettermen Rose Mick Walker. We're going to break down Ohio State's big recruiting weekend for the Texas game, take a look ahead to a decidedly smaller recruiting list for the Grambling game, and go into some of the big picture stuff that is the focus of Ohio State recruiting right now, especially in the class of 2026. And then we're going to start to break down something we'll do week by week where we go position by position to break down the most important players for Ohio State in the class of 2027. Let's get that started right now. This is Talking Stuff. Here now with Mick Walker of LettermenRow.com, part of the On3 Network. Mick, thank you for taking time to join me again on Talking Stuff. How was your week? And a happy belated anniversary to you and your lovely young bride. How was your anniversary? What'd you do? Did you get away? Did you go anywhere? Did you make her a nice dinner? Did you buy her something nice? What'd you guys do? Tell us all about it.
All right, so we'll run down that quick. There were no gifts. We just wrote a couple of letters to each other. We tried to keep it inexpensive, but also sentimental a little bit. We got away up to the lovely place in the Mohicans in the central area of Columbus up there in Ohio, I guess. They have a great place up there with some tree houses that my parents got us a gift card to for anniversary. So we went up there, and last night we got dinner. So it's been interesting. It was because that was our actual anniversary. I haven't seen Birm or Spencer or Austin or anybody at all this week. I'll see them for the first time on Saturday.
Isn't that beautiful though when you don't have to see our faces in person?
It's just weird because it feels like the past month I've seen you guys almost every day.
Yeah. Paper is the traditional first anniversary gift. So writing cards.
Third, Birm. Last week you mentioned, I know you were on the sidelines for the Notre Dame game. That was actually my wedding days. We got married at Notre Dame.
Really? You've been married for 3 years now?
Yeah. Believe it or not, Birm, I am 25. I think you would like to believe I am about 18.
Wow. I really thought you got, okay. So leather, I believe, is the third anniversary gift, traditionally speaking. So maybe you buy her a new pair of shoes or like a handbag.
I know your
candlesticks are always nice.
Birm is a big shoes guy for anybody that's not paying attention. He gets a new pair every season. So his new ones this season are pretty nice. I've complimented him already. So I'm excited to see him again on Saturday.
Try to keep it fresh. Speaking of keeping it fresh, Mick, we talked a lot last Thursday on the first episode that we did of Talking Stuff regarding the Texas visitors list. There was roughly 100 kids in town. Obviously, we're not going to go player by player to break down those visitors and everything that we've heard. People, I believe, are of the mindset that if you don't receive immediate commitments on a huge weekend like this, that it's not a success. I personally don't subscribe to that. We both know that Ohio State's effort is not to force or pressure kids into on-campus commitments. That is not their way. It's not what they want to do. And quite frankly, when you have 100 visitors or so, and 98 of them are in the classes of 2027 or 2028 or beyond that, there's not a lot of value in getting a commitment this early anyway, unless it's from an in-state player. And so we're going to break down some of the guys that visited, talk about some of the things that we've heard, maybe do a little bit of conversation about like where the needle was really moved for Ohio State this past week. So let's just flip there and start with the offense. This is the list that we had a week ago. This is most of these guys made it, as far as I know. I can't be. I'm looking in I did not see Munchin Sales. Did you see him?
I did not. I haven't been able to catch up with him afterwards. I'll have to check with this guy. I'll send a text here in a minute when we take a break from talking. But Wayne Shanks, the running back from Texas, is the only one I was told completely did not make it. Same with Quay Ford. He did not. Like their flight did not come together for both those guys out of Texas. So those are the two looking at this list that I was told for sure did not make it. But everybody else, like the interesting guy is David Gabriel Georgia. So we'll talk about more. He was there. I saw Keemon Spell a couple of times there. Champ Mons was there, and he stayed through Saturday or stayed through Sunday. And maybe that's where we start, just because I know that's something you and I both dug around a lot on.
Yeah, because on a list this big, the question is, how do you determine or how do we decipher who Ohio State's really prioritizing? And I think the best way to do that is to see which players stayed into the evening on Saturday and then had meetings on Sunday and were there with the coaches on Sunday when Ohio State went back to practice. That's what Champ Mons did. That's what David Gabriel Georges did. That is what Eric McFarland did, Brock Williams, etc. So like it's a good indicator of who the priority is. Champ Mons, man, I'm telling you, when you see that kid in person, it is crazy to think that he's a 2028 prospect. I don't know if he's old for his age or if he's just like someone who happens to like, he's got like a Greg Oden vibe about him, man. Dude looks super old. But again, the Buckeyes are really pushing there and making themselves an early favorite. I don't know that they're really going to try and wrap up any commitment early from someone like that. But the quarterback group in general, between Mons and Tabron and Proc and Matthew Lee, who I really liked physically. I thought Matthew Lee looked really good. He actually camped at Ohio State this summer and is not a guy that was on the radar until last week. But what was your biggest takeaway or the thing that you heard Champ Mons and his visit to Ohio State?
Like you said, it was mainly just that he stayed through Sunday and got to spend some more time with, like, that's when the prospects can kind of show reciprocal interest into Ohio State. Like, yeah, you can make the trip up for Texas and you can watch the game and you can see it 1 versus 2 and then fly back that night. But if you want to pay for an extra night of hotel, if you want to come up with both your parents like Champ Mons did, his mom and dad came up with them. And we can talk about parents and who came with who later, because I know that pertains to something in the secondary and a current Ohio State commit. But I think that's the biggest thing, is just hearing that he saw that he had both his parents up. He seemed to be enjoying it. Like, I saw him when he was walking down the tunnel, like taking in the initial side of the stadium, just kind of whispering in his dad's ear. And you don't know what he said during that conversation, but I have to assume that it was something obviously that was exciting to kind of just see the whole stadium filled and potentially playing in front of 100,000 people like he could do at Ohio State.
Yeah, a wonderful Champ Mons is his name. His father's name is also wonderful. That's pretty awesome. I mean, I hope that he names like his son like Awesome Mons or something like that. But maybe wonderful is just a family name. So, or if it wasn't, it's getting to be there. I talked to Keemon Spell a little bit after his visit. It's interesting, Mick, because we've been talking now off the record or off talking stuff and in any other format over at lettermenrow.com and the written stuff. There's David Gabriel Georges on the list, and then there's every other running back in the class of 2027. But Keemon Spell is like a 5-star running back, and he's really, really good. He's being pursued hard by Notre Dame, by Michigan, Ohio State, now starting to get into the mix. He is coming out of this visit saying that he definitely wants to return again, that he wants to take an official visit to Ohio State. What do you make of that? Because it seems like a kid who's from Pennsylvania, committed this early to Penn State. It seems like it's a kind of, what's the word I'm looking for here? It's not really something that you look at and say, well, that's the best use of Ohio State's time. But when you're taking a broad approach and you're looking at all kids from all over the country, there's no reason you can't build a relationship. And Carlos Lachlan and Tony Johnson have done a nice job with Keemon Spell, with Noah Roberts, with Ty Phillips. Like, it's starting to really turn into a much bigger board than we anticipated.
Yeah, and that's probably the most fascinating thing, is you would think with a 5-star guy, you got to blow up his phone or you got to do all these different things to get him on campus. And I really don't think it's been anything over the top from, like you mentioned, Carlos Lachlan or Tony Johnson with Keemon Spell. It's kind of been, if you'd like to come, if you want to like build a relationship and stay in contact, or even Ryan Day's been in contact, I know, a little bit. It's been very like in a very Ohio State approach, if we're being honest, of like, we're going to pour into you, but if you want more from us, you got to come onto campus and you got to see it and you got to show us. And that's what Keemon Spell has done, which really actually, like you said, expands the board, makes it interesting. Because I think a month ago, if we would have sat down and talked about running backs in 27, it would have been David Gabriel Georges at the top. And then we probably would have said Noah Roberts. And then we would have touched on guys that are on this list, like Elijah Kimball. He would be a talented second back. Ty Phillips would be a good second back. And now Keemon Spell has kind of put himself in that top tier with David and Noah Roberts. But still, I'm just surprised that he's at this point, because I didn't think in August that this would actually be a real thing.
No, and you bring up a really interesting point there. I think, and it's an important point. Maybe it's more important than it is interesting. It doesn't matter either way. Ohio State, like every kid in the country, if Ohio State calls, is going to answer the phone and say, yes, I'm interested in Ohio State. Even kids that are committed elsewhere, like Penn State. But until a kid goes out of his way and shows up on campus and does all of the stuff to actually show that interest is legitimate, it's not really worth Ohio State's investment of time or resources to recruit a kid. So I think you'll start to see now that relationship with Keemon Spell elevating itself. And I don't know that I would expect it to get to the point where it is with David Gabriel Georges. But Ohio State is going to want 2 running backs in that class of 2027, especially because they're only taking one with Favor Aki in the class of 2026, who also visited last week, and he'll visit this weekend. He was in a boot. He said he sprained his ankle pretty good on the first play of his senior season, so he's going to miss a few weeks. Unfortunate for Favor, but it's neither here nor there. The point is Ohio State is going to want 2 running backs in the class of 2027. I just did get confirmation that Manchin Sales did make his visit to Ohio State, but haven't seen any feedback, and I have not been able to get a hold of him, and neither of you. So you just never know, but that seems like it's Ohio State and Alabama really at the top there for Manchin. Dakota Garant, another guy, another borderline 5-star wide receiver, said it was just a spectacular visit, really amazing trip for him. Easton Royal down there in Louisiana. I did not see it because I was traveling on. Did he get offered this past weekend or not? I didn't.
I'd have to double check, and I know he was on a list of guys I was told popped into the Woody on Sunday. So maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But obviously him staying through Sunday, I saw him there. He came up with a big 7-on-7 team with Jameer Brown and Keyshawn Bowman, who was right below him on this list, and an Oregon commit. So it's hard to kind of gauge that factor. But him staying the night, showing up on Sunday is something that I do think is at least makes me go, okay, we have to talk about Easton Royal for a second on this show, because I didn't expect that to happen, and at least show him, again, pour this much interest back into Ohio State.
He does not list. He hasn't announced any offer from Ohio State, so that's why we didn't see it. But it's somewhat surprising if Brian Hartline didn't offer him. But the reality is, it's going to be very, very difficult to pull a kid like that out of Louisiana. So we'll talk more about that over the next few months. Wide receiver in 2027 continues to be focused on a very small group of guys at the top, and then really a wide open group of guys that are trying to jockey for position, all of which may be ruled and rendered moot if Eric McFarland ends up reclassifying to the class of 2027. He was there Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I don't care. Again, I've said it on the record on Twitter and other places. I think Eric McFarland is the best receiver in the country, regardless of class. I don't know that there's a more explosive or more dynamic player in the nation with the football in his hands. But if you think about the idea of linking him up with Jameer Brown and either Manchin Sales or Dakota Garant in the class of 2027, boy, that'd be pretty remarkable. I think for me, one of the dial movers of the weekend, and it's interesting because nationally there's this perception with Brock Williams, Mick, that Ohio State being the less sexy tight end usage team is trailing, whether it's Texas or Georgia or Oregon, that Brock Williams is preferring those schools over Ohio State. I think we both talked to a number of people inside of the Ohio State program, and nobody feels that way.
Yeah, every time I've asked about Brock, it's been always, we feel like we're at the top or near the top. And I think Ohio State, even you can ask them about Georgia. I mentioned Georgia, and they even somewhat get it. I don't know. I don't want to say offended because it feels wrong to say it, but they get very confused why it seems like Georgia's just this giant tight end tradition. Obviously, they've done well with Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington and recent guys, but obviously Ohio State has tight ends in the NFL. And the more fascinating thing is when you're Keenan Bailey or you're Wendy Laurent, the assistant tight ends coach after this weekend, the plays you're sending Brock Williams, or hey, you remember that Nate Roberts block as the fullback on 4th and 1 at the goal line, or hey, look at this Will Kasbaric block on Colin Simmons that allowed us to throw a touchdown. I understand Mac Claire had the cool catch there in the second quarter that kind of kept a drive alive, second or third quarter. They kept a drive alive, but he also had the drop. So the plays that you're sending are blocking ones. And I think, honestly, that's what might appeal to Brock Williams more, just because that's where he needs to improve on if he's going to reach his max potential.
Ohio State's mantra and its motto when it comes to tight end play is that you have to be a complete player. That's not a surprise. But anybody who is still trying to recruit against Ohio State by saying the Buckeyes don't use the tight end is insane. I mean, I've talked about it all week on the beat and other variations of the show that we do on the Austin Birm Show. But I was told upwards of 70% of the game, Ohio State have multiple tight ends on the field. You're not going to find programs in the country that actually play the tight end more than Ohio State does. Now, are they getting thrown the ball 15 times a game? No, that's not the case. But if you go out there and you do all the other things that you have to do to help the team win, then eventually you start to get the football. And Max Claire is going to catch a lot of passes this year. He only caught the one on Saturday against Texas, but regardless, Ohio State was in 12, 13, 14 personnel for upwards of 70% of the game. And that is a really telling thing about where the offense is going in the future, I think, because they really believe that if you can get a dynamic enough tight end, someone that like Max Clare who can play in a 13 set and then still be a vertical pass catcher, then all of a sudden you're really changing the way defenses have to attack you. So,
and Nate Roberts was Nate Roberts. I know it's one snap, but he's the only true freshman offensive player that played on Saturday. Like you look at all these wide receivers that they got, Bo Jackson, who got like the only one that they trusted, and obviously again it's a very specific situation where he got in, but the only one that got on the field was Nate Roberts, and you were down there on that, I think that corner where, so you would have saw it came right out of before they took that timeout in that goal line setting. Keenan Bailey's now on the field, and he's very animated down there talking to the tight ends and talking to the offense. So I can only imagine Brock Williams caught a glimpse of that and probably had to feel a little bit fired up just seeing that Keenan Bailey cares this much about it.
Yeah, and he'll see that again this weekend. I would imagine that Nate Roberts is going to play a lot against Grambling in Ohio in the next 2 weeks. As guys like Will Kesmerick and Max Clare, who don't need as many reps, are not going to get them. Offensive line-wise, we can move down. Kellen Weimer, I continue to believe Ohio State's in a really great spot there. The relationship with Weimer and Justin Fry, with Tyler Bowen is really, really good. The Buckeyes are moving the dial there quite a bit. And for a kid who grew up a Michigan fan, I think he's feeling a little bit different now. What I'm surprised about here, Mick, and we talk again, it's not the Ohio State way to pressure for in-state commitments early or any commitments early. But it is a little bit surprising to me that players like Weimer, players like Mason Wilt, I'm going to even include Jimmy Kalis in this because even though he's from Pittsburgh and lives in Pittsburgh with his sister at Ohio State, and as much as he's been there, I'm considering him basically an Ohio recruit at this point. I'm surprised that none of them are seeing a value in making an early commitment. And because Ohio State's going to sign probably 5 or 6 offensive linemen, you can start to be a builder of your class. B, when none of those guys that I just mentioned are like national level 5-star type talents that are going to have, sure, they're going to have a ton of great opportunities. I'm not going to try to downplay their scholarship offers, but it's not a recruitment that's going to be like Ohio State, Texas, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, et cetera. These are going to be kids that are going to be hard pressed to have better relationships, better offer early than Ohio State. They're from Ohio. They love Ohio State. It's weird that none of them are seeing the opportunity to jump in early. And in the 2027 class, which right now just has 2 commitments with Jameer Brown and Brady Edmonds, like, it would be a good time to start building out when you need to have some foundational pieces.
Yeah, and like it's one thing with Jimmy Kalis, who has a handful of other Power 4 offers. Like he's going to visit legitimate, like, whether it's North Carolina or Texas or Michigan or like other Big Ten real program, like, and not as a disrespect to like Virginia Tech or West Virginia, but like those are the other visits that Mason Wilt is lining up. Like, if you're looking at that lineup, I can see what you're saying, where if you're Mason Wilt and his family, why don't you sit down and look, maybe it just is better for us to make this call and just keep going to Ohio State games rather than going down to Blacksburg or
he looked great. I mean, as far as, when we saw him on Saturday, and it's not a direct apples to apples comparison because I think eventually they're going to play different positions. But Reed Gherkin, the Perrysburg 2027 offensive tackle, who does not have an Ohio State offer, versus Mason Wilt, who does. Wilt certainly looks physically like the more Ohio State ready type of offensive lineman. He's a guard. He's a little thicker. He's a little shorter, but he looked like a kid who's really put in the work to improve his body and the way that he looks physically in the last year. So if that's an indicator of what to expect out of him over the next 6 months, I think that's pretty exciting for Ohio State. I know you're a huge fan of Cam Wagner. I'm a huge fan of Luke and Jaychuk. The Illinois duo, it seems like Tyler Bowen is really in a good position with both of them early. Yeah,
I said it last week and I continue to believe it. Like if you told me the first 5 names on this offensive line list ended up in Ohio State's class, like at this time next year, like you wouldn't have to give that convincing of a case for me. Like I'd believe it. And I could even like Brody McNeil's not on this list. He's a 3-star guy from Virginia, but Tyler Bowen's been recruiting him for a while. He kind of
that kid raves about Ohio State. He's raving about it still.
And so if you said that all 5 or 6 of their offensive line commits came from this weekend here, obviously Kellel Johnson, who we both like from Moeller as well, wasn't on campus, but like there's a very real case that a lot of these guys have visited. Like you said, Cam Wagner, he spoke highly of. He's 6'7". Like just walking out of the tunnel, he looks like a guy that could eventually play out Ohio State or play like big time football. Luke N.J. Chalk he's probably a swing type of guy. I don't know if he's a right tackle, left tackle, but he's got Ohio State like bloodlines. I believe his grandfather or great grandfather played for Woody Hayes, or at least played like he played. Luke texted me a picture. It was a black and white picture of his great grandfather, I believe, playing at Ohio State, or like the roster picture. So
yeah,
obviously, I mean, black and white photos are a thing where Birm was younger as well. So I don't want to date. I don't want to date him too much here, but
I don't want to date you either. You're married for 3 years, Mick.
But Luke is definitely a guy that like I have to respect any of these guys that continue to make the trip down to Columbus and camp and visit and earn the offer. And that's exactly what Luke did this summer. Like he didn't have to, like he's visited a couple times. He didn't have to keep showing up, but he did. Now he's got the offer and he's become a priority. Same with Cam Wagner.
Yeah. Let's swap over to the defense if we can. It was a less defensive intensive recruiting list, but still pretty good. I'm going to jump past the defensive line right now and just head to Josiah Poyer. He was the only player on this list that I think, other than Amari Miller, who did not have an Ohio State offer heading into the weekend of the defensive visitors, but left with one. So that's telling. Big time linebacker from St. John Bosco in California. The Buckeyes love recruiting out there, and he's going to be a player worth watching for sure as James Laurinaitis gets in early. I think the Buckeyes are his 5th scholarship offer. So that's a little bit of early work from Laurinaitis, making sure that he's ahead of the game there. The last time he tried to get a linebacker from St. John Bosco was Kingston Viamuasa, who Ohio State was in on early and was unable to hold off Notre Dame, primarily because of some of the work that James had done while he was working at Notre Dame. That's neither here nor there. Defensive line, I know you've got a good relationship with Braden Parks. What is your take on the defensive tackle from Illinois and his visit?
Yeah, it seemed like he enjoyed it a ton. Like I believe he has some Notre Dame blood, like in his lineage of like just having people that played at Notre Dame, like whether I think it's grandparents or godfather or something along those lines. I have to look it up. So Notre Dame's always kind of been viewed as the team to beat in that recruitment. I think Ohio State's squarely become maybe the second school or the 1B school with Notre Dame up there. And it's just fascinating because he's not the biggest defensive lineman. Like he's shorter than most of the guys they have committed in this 26th class, but he camped this summer, balled out. Matt Patricia watched them, they offered. And I think Ohio State's in a really good spot there. And I'm going to tee you up because I want to hear you talk about Anthony Sweeney, because there's probably nobody that got more noise or spoke more highly of Ohio State or spoke about Ohio State more coming out of this visit than Anthony Sweeney, that 5-star.
Yeah, if there's a spot where Larry Johnson's legacy and his reputation still holds a lot of weight, and this is not meant to be a knock on Larry Johnson, but in the last handful of years, what we've seen across the country is other schools, Georgia, USC, et cetera, have basically said, hey, Larry Johnson is an all-time great, but the game has passed him by. He's not someone who has developed defensive ends at a high clip in the last 5 years. The last edge rusher to make real noise out of Ohio State was Chase Young, blah, blah, blah. But this is stuff that was happening, 7-8 years ago, where people were saying Larry Johnson was only producing players because he was recruiting all 5-stars. And I don't know why that's a problem. Like if you're able to recruit all 5-stars, that's what you should do. Sweeney, 6'4", 230. He's one of those guys that stayed into Sunday. And again, that is pretty telling about where Ohio State is. So it's fascinating to me, Mick, because Maryland has shown very early in the NIL era that they're willing to get super aggressive for the best players in Maryland to keep them home. Obviously, Ohio State, Penn State, everyone else in the country is going to be after Anthony Sweeney. As you said,
a big one too. Tennessee's really dug in on a lot of these East Coast guys since they're so far east. But Tennessee,
and eventually South Carolina will be, because South Carolina's made a lot of moves in the DMV. But at 6'4", 235, 240 pounds, he's the prototypical defensive end edge rusher Ohio State needs. And there's no more important position in the entire class of 2027, the defensive end. Having Chris Whitehead and Anthony Sweeney on campus this past weekend was very important. Whitehead left pretty much immediately after the game, but Sweeney did stick around to Sunday and spent more time with Larry Johnson, more of an opportunity to really figure out how much Ohio State's prioritizing him and seeing how that felt. Again, it's too early, unfortunately. Like, because of NIL, like, we used to be in a world where, like, a year from signing day, you'd be like, hey man, there's no harm in committing early. Let's get it done and start building momentum. But at this point, I don't know that there's any real reason for Ohio State or anybody else to try to get a kid to commit, knowing that an early commitment is essentially just going to be used as a bargaining chip in the middle of the NIL table. So, that's why even a guy like Jameer Weish in Ohio, who he was there with his brother, Jamarcus, obviously the Purdue commit in the class of 2026. Like, man, in a different world, I think Ohio State should be telling Jameer Weiss, like, let's go. Like, there's no reason for you to wait. Like, let's just get this done. You're an hour and a half away from campus. You can be here working with Coach Johnson and the defense all the time. You can get a real head start on your development and your career. But in this era, that's kind of a waste of time.
And it applies to even like a Ronaldo Perez from Columbus. Like he's not committed early. Like, he's going to take his visits, and I don't know whether that's an NIL thing or just wanting to look around, but it applies.
He told me that's just his family's way. He said, he's got a couple trips coming up. I think he's going back out to USC. I think he's going back down to Florida, maybe. And he said he wants
another one. Like, Tennessee is just everywhere, and with now their Adidas money and whatnot. That, like, we'll talk about them more here in a minute, but Tennessee is a big threat in that one as well.
Yeah, and he just said he wants to wait until the spring, and which is fine. Again, the spring is not, in a traditional sense, committing 7-8 months before signing day is not early. It's not late. It's pretty much where it should be, in my opinion. But we'll see how that matters for Ohio State, because we've actually seen, this is 3 cycles in a row where in-state players at Ohio State really didn't commit until the spring after their junior year. And I think that is something that the Buckeyes are more than okay with. Like, it gives them time to get more evaluations and more thorough look at these kids and see who they really are, and go from there. So let's quickly run down the line of the defensive backs as we move along here with the Texas visitor recap with Mick Walker of LettermenRow.com. Mick, I know that you are a huge fan of Aaron Washington. I know you're a big fan of Danny Lang. I think there's some people who are surprised Lang didn't commit. He continues to suggest and say outright that Ohio State is his favorite, that he might want to be the guy to continue the pipeline, and he wants to build the pipeline for Mater Dei. But yet, how much of that, in your opinion, these are kids I know you talk to, like, how much of that is just bluster? How much of that is a kid who's genuinely torn, in your opinion?
I really do think Danny Lang's fine. Like, I imagine most of those Mater Dei coaches or people out there out west probably tell these guys, like, don't commit. You don't have to. Like, we can handle things differently. You can control this a little bit more. But every time I've talked to Danny, like, he openly admitted this is the best visit he's ever been on. Like, obviously there's some of that. You're just seeing a top 2 match, like a top 3 matchup. You're getting to watch just really great football. If you're a defensive back, you're seeing Jermaine Matthews and Davison Igbinosin and Caleb Downs and all these guys just completely take away the Texas passing game. But there's also the element of, like, he came back a little. I believe him and Aaron, I don't know if they got a full sit down or a full tour, but I believe they still popped in before they flew out back to California. So you get to spend a little bit time, another conversation with Ryan Day, and those relationships, the on-field factor, and, like, he got to be here with Chris Henry Jr. and Caden Dixon-Wyatt. Like, he's got teammates here. He knows he's going to have guys here, and I do think he's probably a little bit torn. Same thing with Aaron Washington. Aaron doesn't talk as much. Which is interesting because I think he's probably the more, like, interesting, more vocal personality. He doesn't seem to want to do much of the media, but both those guys are fascinating. Caleb Elkins is another one. I've been a big fan of his, and he's another guy probably a little bit different than the Mason Wolf category, but in a similar vein of, like, he's got a lot of visits lined up, but when it comes down to it, do you really want to go fly to Alabama, or would you rather just drive down to Columbus, or like I don't know if when that moment comes for him, but and Ohio State doesn't want a lot of these early commitments, but he's someone I could eye for, like, a November or an October, something like that.
Well, especially for, again, players that are in that middle area, right? Like, they're not the elite of the elite. They're not a top 50 player in the country. They're a 250, 300 ranked player. Like, your window of opportunity to commit to Ohio State is not open forever. And your spot is not guaranteed. You are not one of those guys who has the leverage against Ohio State. So while I appreciate kids taking their time and doing their due diligence and making sure that the fit is right for them, just know that window is not open permanently. Another California defensive back who's not on this list is Gavin Williams. He visited in the spring and earned an offer at the time, came back, said it was an amazing trip, told me basically that he can't wait to be back, and he knows that it's a program that is different, is what he said. So the Buckeyes love to recruit nationally. So when you're these kids local, man, if you're like Caleb Elkins or Jimmy Callis, like it is, you're running a little bit of a risk if you don't take that spot when it's there for you.
Yeah, building off of that, Kenneth Sullivan, he's a guy that we probably I don't think we talked about leading up to it, but he's a 3-star guy from Virginia. Could be like a nickel type, and he's somebody who I think Ohio State really likes after what he showed at camp this summer, but he just doesn't seem to get talked about a ton. So I wanted to make sure we mentioned him. And he didn't, and I think he was a late addition to the list, or maybe you and I just didn't collaborate this beforehand, but we should probably take a second to mention that it's Kellen Hall, I believe that's how you pronounce his first name.
2028 from Kentucky. Yeah.
Yeah. Birm has a habit. If he tweets about a guy often or whenever they tweet about stuff and Birm interacts with that tweet, it seems to be a tell that he likes the guy, and Kellen's one of those guys that Birm typically likes to respond to. So
Kellen Hall is, to me, the idea, again, that you could be the leader, and I think Ohio State is the leader for Jameer Weish and Kellen Hall at this point in the class of 2028. Those are two top 12 ranked defensive linemen, top overall players in the country, both defensive linemen. Like there's something special brewing there with Kellen Hall for sure. He is a big time player. He's traveling out to Oklahoma this weekend to see Oklahoma and Michigan. That's going to be a guy who's a national recruit, and that you're going to have to go to great lengths to get. But the early relationship, he's been at Ohio State multiple times. I think he came in the spring, came in the summer, and now comes in the first game of the season. Like the relationship is there. It's going to be worth watching, Mick, how Ohio State recruits defensive linemen that are that far away from signing at this point, because like nobody, we've talked for a decade, like how long is Larry Johnson's career going to be? Maybe it's one more year, maybe it's two. I don't think there's anybody who believes Larry Johnson's still going to be coaching at Ohio State in the year 2028. So what I'm really wanting to see is who else is involved in these recruitments when it comes to the defensive line. How involved is Matt Patricia? Is there an opportunity for James Laurinaitis to be involved? Is Tim Walton or Matt Guerreri there? Is it just all of the younger assistants? Is it just Miguel Patrick doing the work? That's something I'm really interested in watching to see how it unfolds, because that is a storyline that is going to take on a life of its own. And I think that it's even a question that has to be asked about the class of 2027, because there's just no certainty what is going to happen with Larry Johnson. Who else here? Asalo Wiliava, another St. John Bosco kid. I really like him. Like I there's something to me about like the poly safeties, the poly defensive backs, the dudes. Like when we were watching that game on Saturday and you saw that number, I think it was number 16 for Texas flying 18, around at linebacker.
Leona Leafau, I believe is who you're talking about.
Like, man, I just like the way those kids play. They play reckless. They play fast. They play mean. And Ohio State is probably at the top of the list, I think, right now for a Wiliava as well. So another one, though, where California was kind of open for business for a few years, and now USC with their unholy of recruiting department is really trying to shut that down. So we'll see which of those guys Ohio State can get to escape. Jermaine Cobbins, a 2028 from Tennessee. He visited Angelo Smith, Jeremiah Smith's brother. I don't think he actually made it last weekend, and he's on over at lettermenrow.com. If you're on the message boards there, you can see that Jeremiah Smith's younger brother is also on the visitor list for this weekend, which is what we're going to talk about right now. The visitors list for Grambling. They're probably, Mick, if we're being honest, if we're calling a spade, there has probably never been a larger disparity in a recruiting list from one week to the next than we are seeing right now. Because quite frankly, the Ohio State recruiting list for this coming weekend, I think you're going to see a lot of unoffered kids around the state getting a chance to see an Ohio State game. It's kind of a reward for just doing the right things and being a part of your team. And you'll see whole teams coming visit. And it's like a goodwill weekend for Ohio State, more so than it is a aggressive recruiting weekend. Brady Edmonds will be making the trip from California. I would assume he arrives tonight on Thursday evening. He's going to go up to, I believe he's intending to go to Euclid to watch Jameer Brown play football against Lakewood St. Ed on Friday night. That'll be an interesting side note to that game. And then I think Sam Greer, Sincere Johnson, Favor Aki, and local commitments. Probably Jameer Brown will be back, I'd assume. But this weekend is like a snooze fest.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to get into it because talking stuff isn't really the place for it. But I can make a pretty clear case that Ohio State's football recruiting visitors list is the worst of any sport that's planning to like bring in like recruits this week. And I think the women's basketball team, the men's basketball, and baseball, and like they're all bringing in more talented, more top targets this weekend. But it's really, like you said, it's the commits, and the only other real 2027 guy that has an offer that's coming in is JT Garassi, I believe is how you say his name. Is the 4-star three-star tight end from New Jersey. He's somebody that like Birm's probably seen. Like Birm's seen a variation of this Ohio State recruit for like probably a decade. He's the top 500-ish tight end. Like he's a tight end that you would take as the second tight end in the class, and
he's an H-back type, a guy that can do multiple things. Yeah, he's a good
another
player.
Like Bennett Christian type, where it might take 3 or 4 years before 3 years before he's on the field. But when he is, he's just going to be a solid player that you can trust to block and hold his own, like another Will Kazmarek type. Like that's just kind of what he is. And if you're going to go all in to get Brock Williams, that's obviously a guy that you would look at. But it even goes like, but then again, the conversation goes to D'Angelo White out of Cleveland if you can't get Brock Williams. So I like JT, and I thought he looked good at camp, but it's kind of just a weird spot he's in as well.
Yeah, he is absolutely a guy who's a complimentary second tight end in the class. But he also has offers from Alabama and Florida, and he's been all over the country. He's seen a lot of places. He's camped a lot of places. Great kid, and making the trip. And he'll be, because of the way this weekend is setting up, he's going to get a pretty attentive coaching staff, I think, to him, which is nice. Khalil Johnson.
I was talking to JT. He's playing, I believe they play. Don Bosco's played a full national schedule. They played Florida on Friday night. He's flying from Florida directly to Columbus, and I think he's going to do the Sunday thing as well. So there's a clear interest from JT. It's just he's about the only guy this weekend, so he might be the only meeting Ryan Day has on Sunday.
Yeah. Again, if you're on the LettermenRow.com message boards, part of the On3 network, there's a running visitors list. Khalil Johnson is included on that list for this weekend against Grambling State or Grambling. I don't know if it's Grambling State or Grambling, but I think it's just Grambling now.
Austin uses Grambling State, and he's typically our guy on this stuff.
Yeah, but when I looked up their game last week, it just says Grambling. So I don't know. But then it says Grambling State University Athletics on their website. So I'm going to go with Grambling State. Either way, that's irrelevant. But we do not expect Khalil Johnson to make it this weekend either, based on his feedback to you on Wednesday night, right?
Yeah, I'd assume that Minnesota game on October 4th, when they get a Big Ten opponent into the shoe for the first time this season, will be the next bigger recruiting weekend. I think there's still.
Well, actually, I mean, I don't mean to cut you off, Mick, but I actually think even with Ohio on the schedule next week, the fact that it's a night game, I think Ohio State, you're going to see a much bigger recruiting list for Ohio than you would expect, because it's a night game and it's an opportunity to bring in kids that are not going to be able to make it from other parts of the country. So that's something we'll certainly track throughout the week. But I think that list is going to be bigger than anticipated, because you kind of have to take advantage of it. You only have 7 home games this year, but the way the schedule sets up, it's like there's Texas, which is obviously everybody coming to visit. There's Grambling, where nobody's coming to visit. And then you have this game against Ohio at night. Then you're not back home for another 3 weeks. Then you're gone for 3 more weeks. And then you don't play again until November at home against Penn State, which will obviously be a huge list. So I think the way the home schedule sets up is actually kind of ideal for where Ohio State is trying to go to finish out the class of 2026, which I think is where we'll take this conversation next, because Ohio State sits with the number 9 ranked class in the country as we record this on Thursday afternoon. Just one spot ahead of Michigan in the on-3 team rankings. 21 commitments. Buckeyes have not done much in the last 2 months. The last commitment was from Jaquaden Guilford. We have not seen anything happen since then. And you and I were talking and trading some texts on Wednesday, and I said, I would just wonder, like, when are things going to happen again in 2026? We've heard, both of us, for multiple weeks now, that the plan from Ohio State is to reevaluate everybody. And it has lacked specificity beyond that. I was able on Wednesday evening to get a little bit of specificity about where things are going and maybe when we will see some movement in the class of 2026. And so here's what I was told, what I heard, what I was able to glean, that it seems like the Buckeyes, we are heading into week 2 of high school football around the country for like everyone. It's week 3 in Ohio. But the plan, and a lot of other states are also in week 3, but let's just, like everyone around the country, I think, is pretty much started at this point now. The goal for Ohio State in their reevaluate everyone approach was to get 3 to 4 games of film from everyone's senior year and then basically re-rank them. Like, and there will be a pair of lists, right? There will be the uncommitted list. Let's rank those dudes. And then there's going to be the list of players who are committed elsewhere that Ohio State has not recruited, and let's rank those dudes. And then there's let's rank the players we've recruited and tried to get and missed and re-rank them and see where everyone is. And then you'll start to see Ohio State making some moves. So I think, as you said, the Minnesota game on October the 4th is one where I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see some 2026 names pop up. But specifically, I think the Penn State game in November opens up the door and allows Ohio State to have plenty of time to evaluate, to start building some relationships. It's what we saw last year with Jordan Woods, basically, is the exact same plan. You watch through September, see how that goes. You reach out in late September, early October. He's on campus in November. He commits a week later. But that plan has to coincide, Mick, with NIL flexibility, aggression, etc., especially if you're going to flip any big time players. If you're Ohio State, and you're not, but if you were, let's be clear, you're not Ohio State. Which positions are you still most trying to figure out?
I mean, you mentioned it with 2027, but it's got to be defensive end, just because that way, if you get a good one in 2026, you could at least justify only taking one in 2027. Trying to pay for 2 really good guys in 2027, like 2027, would be difficult. But if you can go get, we can say his name. It feels like somewhat like a Voldemort type of thing at this point. But Luke Wafel is obviously the guy. Like that's whenever somebody, when they get you on a radio show or a YouTube video, and same thing for like, will Ohio State be able to get Luke Wafel back? And the true, like the honest answer is I don't know. And you wrote a
and probably not. The honest answer is probably not. And I think that people need to wrap their heads around that. There is no, and maybe there's still ongoing conversation or like in the occasional check-in with a player like Carter Meadows committed to Michigan. But like the focus is Luke Wafel, and it has been. And there's some conversation happening from what I was told, like, but it's not regular. It's not like Ohio State is texting him every day and saying, "Hey, Luke, we miss you. Don't you miss us?" It's none of that. It's not like Ryan Day and Matt Patricia and the Ohio State staff are calling him and his family begging. Basically, Ohio State's saying, "Hey, we're here. You know we're here." Unless that next conversation also includes Ohio State's ability to stand up and say, "And we have figured out a way to make sure that you get paid similarly to what you've received from USC," unless it includes that conversation, then it's sort of irrelevant.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the most frustrating thing about what you were talking about earlier, like when we were texting about it, is it feels like for a month now we've heard texted like, "Oh yeah, NIL coming down the stretch in December, like we'll have it in order." And it's like, all right, like what's the order been like kind of putting it together? And it's like, well, we haven't put it together yet. And it's like, well, you guys have to start a plan to start using it. And I just don't know. like you said, it just goes down to evaluating guys. Like if you go down the rivals rankings and look at the edge, there's guys committed to TCU or Ole Miss. Like there's guys that if you look and you go, Ohio State should be able to flip or get those guys from. Obviously, if they're the highest paid guy in that person, like respective school's class, that might be more difficult. But if Ohio State's coming correct with the finance part of it, there's guys out there they can go get, whether that's a Luke Wayful or that's somebody else.
Yeah, and to be clear, again, it doesn't matter how much we say this. It doesn't matter what we're being told until we start to see results on this front. But I was told Ohio State has been given some semblance of a green light on the NIL front to start getting a little bit more creative. And that doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight. That doesn't mean it's going to happen like for the players that everyone expects. Because there are still other things that are in play here, like NIL contracts and how they actually work. We don't know. And if we're going to talk about Luke Wayful, as the prime example of this, again, the rumors when Luke Wayful committed to USC were that he was receiving upwards of $2.5 million from the Trojans. A, we don't know if that's true. B, if it is true, we don't know how much of it he received up front. C, if he received a good portion of that up front, we don't know if he would be forced to pay it back if he were to flip his commitment. D, we don't know if Lincoln Riley was fired, for example, because if USC flounders and isn't better, and if Lincoln Riley were fired, we don't know if that invalidates the NIL contract. We don't know what the buyout language is in the contract. That contract could be for $2.5 million and have a $1.5 million buyout. And if that's the case, then Ohio State all of a sudden, which didn't want to pay him $2.5 million, might be forced to pay $4 million to get him. And so there are so many unknowns still. There are so many questions that have to be asked that to me, and I know it'll be judged as me, trying to cover for the program or trying to make excuses, but I think you're better off going out and going after players like you're talking about who are committed to TCU type of schools or Baylor or Luke Wayful can play for Ohio State next year. That's why he was the number one defensive end target on the board alongside Kari Wilder, because Ohio State believes physically those two are ready to play next season. But if you can't get him and it's going to cost you $4 million, which again, Ohio State is not in the mindset or the habit of completely upsetting the natural order of their roster, then these weeks of evaluation are vital for Ohio State, and the re-ranking of the boards, like those are vital. And it's going to be probably another month or so until we start to see any of these things come to fruition and these names come to fruition. But I was stunned in conversations I had on Wednesday night at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center how confident the Ohio State staff is that they have a plan that is going to work. Now, what that means is totally up to the listener, I guess, because maybe they think that what will work is exactly what they've done and they'll be fine no matter what. It's Ohio State. But there is a plan in place that involves something. And most of that, I think, is getting really active in the transfer portal. And in a world where tampering rules don't really exist, and there's a million different ways to connect with families and agents throughout the season, if there's a player Ohio State sees that they're like, man, that's the guy that can really help us, I think you're going to see them make some plays and take some swings on the NIL front when it comes to high school players. But those players have to be really good, or you just hold off and you start using your college scouting department to figure out which direction you go there, because it's like Ohio State is not going to sit back and not accumulate good players. Like, they're going to bring in good players. They're going to have to pay for them. The question is, what makes the most sense in paying for them? And again, we can go back to the Braylon Womack decision 2 weeks ago. I don't know how time works. Everyone saw on Saturday, Mick, how good Jalen McLean is, right? And if the ask from Braylon Womack is 2x or 3x what Jalen McLean is making right now, how on earth do you justify that if you're Ohio State, knowing that you have this player in his second year in Columbus who is a bona fide future superstar who you're going to have to pay a lot more next year? Like there is a point where it goes off the rails, and Ohio State is working really hard to not let that happen.
Yeah, and like you said, you got to get really good players, but there's also an element of like you have one legitimate cornerback committed, you have one like true defensive end committed, you have one probably guy that when you say, hey, he's going to play safety for us, and that's Blaine Bradford. Like, there's a point of getting really good players, but there's also a point of just like filling classes. And like I think Ohio State has work to do on both those angles, and how they approach, like, you choose to do that, I'm not entirely sure yet. But I think that's probably, like you said, the restacking, re-racking of it all. Of like, Jordan Woods was clearly not the guy that they wanted to go spend $10 million on last year, but he was the guy that they said, if we need another cornerback in the class, he's the guy we want. So you got to find a good.
To be fair, they did not spend $10 million on Jordan Woods.
Not that Jordan, correct. But that's like the thing is, you have to go find these guys of both of those angles because they need another corner. Like,
right. There has to be a happy medium, and that's why, like, there's all the conversation about Luke Wayful, but I think you can find a player like him in the transfer portal. But that's why, like, there's also as much of an import placed on someone like Danny Odom, who's still committed to Nebraska and Ohio State is still looking at. So, like, you're absolutely right. Like, this is not all about next year. It's not about like, well, we can only build the roster 1 year at a time, which I think in a lot of ways now you have to, but you still have to try to figure out, like, what's the snip, snap of what we're doing here. You can't have one corner in this class, period. You can't have one safety in this class because you're going to run out of players. So, while I think Ohio State is open and wanting to be more aggressive in the transfer portal with veteran college football players, guys that have made a difference, because those guys can come in and play right away, and that is a better return on your investment. You still have to have the superstars that you're developing inside your program. Otherwise, you lose a lot of what the heart and soul of the Ohio State program is. You can't plaster developed here all over your building and all over your athletic facilities and then go out and only bring in guys from the transfer portal. So
it's also just a better way to spend money. Like I thought everybody wanted Ohio State to spend a ton of money on Murad Watson when he transferred from Syracuse. Like, Will Smith outplayed him this past week when the two teams met in the shoe. Like,
yeah, I don't know if that guy played. I don't even see him. So
he played like 30 snaps, but like Will Smith played 16 and had a much better grade, like much better performance. And like, those are the guys you need. Georgia offered a Georgia State offensive tackle commit. Like, you have to go out and go find these guys just because you need another player at X, Y, and Z position. And that's honestly probably the biggest difference between what's happened at like a Georgia and Alabama in the past of, hey, well, they've taken full classes and full numbers and they've met their numbers. And now that you have money and you have a roster size like Ohio State, like, you got to make sure you're doing that every year, along with adding a Luke Wayful or like top flight guys. Yeah,
I mean, Alabama and Georgia both have been really consistent in the last decade plus, where they were constantly winning the national recruiting titles. You'd see a 28, 29 man class, and there'd be 13 or 14 3-stars in that class. But the top end of it was super, super good. And then you have developmental players and roster fillers and see if you can hit on something. But bottom line, Ohio State has a plan. That's what they say. We choose to believe them. You can choose not to if you don't want to, America. But the point is, we're probably not going to see much of the fruit of that plan until the end of September, middle of October, as far as visitors appearing, names appearing, et cetera. Because right now, there is a whole bunch of work that needs to be done by Mark Pantoni and his scouting staff to determine what the order of those players is going to be. So we'll move on. One player we do know about at the top of the board for Ohio State in the class of 2027 is David Gabriel Georges, the running back from Chattanooga, the Baylor School in Chattanooga by way of Quebec, Canada. Mick is going to see him on Friday night in Tennessee. He's going to go down there and watch him play. Tell us about that game, Mick, and for those wondering why we're just all of a sudden talking about this, every week when we do talking stuff, we're going to go position by position and break down the big board for Ohio State at that spot. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this tonight because we already talked about the big board at running back when we were reviewing the Texas visitors, since almost all of those guys that are on that big board visited for the Texas game. But David Gabriel Georges, clear-cut number one. He is going to be on the cover of Talking Stuff for the second straight week. I think David Sanders is the only other player who's ever had that sort of luxury. So congrats, David. You made it. What are you hoping to see and learn on Friday night in Tennessee, Mick?
Yeah, Byrne likes to say talking to America in this podcast. We're talking to America and Canada at this point.
Yeah, well, now we are. Yeah, I found out a few weeks ago we've got at least one French listener, and I hope that this is someone who can help us when it comes to translating some stuff for David and his family.
But yeah, David's a guy that we've known about since the spring that he was a top guy. So then I start looking at is there a way to get down to see him? I'm not going all the way down to Chattanooga. It just was not going to be possible or no real reason. We have On Three as headquarters in Nashville, so I can get to go down to Nashville, see David play, get to see our guys down in Nashville. And luckily, he's also playing Brentwood Academy, which is home to Oregon wide receiver commit Keyshawn Bowman, who, if you guys were paying attention, was on that visitors list for the Texas game. So it's two guys, one flip target, one like 5-star top target that they're both recruiting in this game. And like I've seen highlights of David and like throughout the season already. He's played a couple games. I'm just fascinated to see him actually play on the field. I'm excited to catch up with him after the game. Hopefully get to meet some of his people, whether that's family, aunts, uncles, that like father, mom. Like I know like they were all there this past weekend at Ohio State. Hopefully we get to meet him again this weekend and again just see how he's feeling after the visit, because now we got a full week essentially. Like the visit glow is wore off. You got to have those meetings. What's it been like when you used to get to sit down and talk to the family? That's the biggest thing I'm trying to find out, on top of just seeing what he looks like in person, because I'm expecting a pretty darn good game if he's as is what we've heard from Ohio State coaches and people around the building for such a long time.
Yeah, and the Rivals industry rankings, David Gabriel Georges is the number 3 ranked running back in the country, behind Keemon Spell, the Penn State commitment, and Landon Williams-Kalis out of Texas. But from the Ohio State perspective, there is David Gabriel Georges, and then there is pretty much everyone else. I believe in my heart of hearts that the decision to effectively move on from every running back in the class of 2026 other than Favor Aki was done intentionally with the idea that anything you can do to open the door a little bit wider for David Gabriel Georges to look at Ohio State and say, hey, this is why that makes the most sense for me, was being done back in the spring. Because once David visited in the spring for the spring game and Ohio State got a chance to lay eyes on him in person, like they'd already had a sense of what he was from his film and knew maybe that there was something special there, but they believe firmly that he might be the best running back in the country regardless of class. And that is not a position Ohio State takes on a lot of players. So, it's funny because we're in this timeline where a lot of even Ohio State fans don't believe that the Buckeyes are going to get the job done on the recruiting trail. But so often in the last decade or longer, since Urban Meyer took over in 2012, like when Ohio State really highlights a guy, when they really like, man, this is our guy, they get him. And generally that's happened at the skill positions far more frequently than like the trenches, but it is happening pretty regularly at the skill positions. And I think Carlos Lachlan did a great job in year one as a recruiter, bringing in Bo Jackson, Isaiah West, Turbo Rogers, going out and getting CJ Donaldson in the transfer portal. Did a great job, obviously, with Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins to help them develop. He's got a great reputation from his time at Oregon with Jordan James and Bucky Irving and guys like that. But like from the Ohio State fan perspective, from the Ohio State evaluating you as a recruiter perspective, there is nothing that he's had to do since he arrived at Ohio State that will be judged more intensely than what happens in this recruitment with David Gabriel Georges.
Yeah, and then we talked about it again last week, the whole first round pick later. Like, I think this is finally the class where it's been, all right, Carlos, you get your first round pick. Like, here's what you're going to be, your allotted amount of money. Go get your guy. And I think, like you said in the spring, that getting David on campus with his family, like, I don't know if there's ever been a time where Carlos Lachlan questioned the standing of like where David Gabriel Georges was, but then you get him on campus around Mark Pantoni and Ryan Day, and everybody goes, okay, you know what, Lach, you're right. Let's all stamp him. And when it comes to it, we'll have a number we want for Savion Hyder and Derek Cooper and all these guys in the summer. But if it gets to a point where we don't want it, we're punting and we're going to go get David Gabriel Georges, because as I was told in the summer, if there was one guy that Ohio State does not want to play against when it comes to a running back, that is David Gabriel Georges. They'll, like, obviously they're going to have to play against Savion Hyder. They could have to play against Derek Cooper. Well, yeah, I guess he could play in next year's game, so I guess they might have to play against him next year when they go to Austin. But if there's one guy they didn't want to play against, it was David Gabriel Georges.
He has all the tools to be a really, really great one. That's why he's number one on the Ohio State big board in the class of 2027 at running back. We'll talk about the wide receivers, tight ends, every other position in that cycle as well over the next few weeks. But for now, I think we've reached our allotment for talking stuff on the Austin Birm Show. Mick Walker from Lettermen Row did a great job, as always, joining me on this episode. If you're watching it on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel you're watching it on. Maybe that's 10 TV, maybe that's 97.1 The Fan. And also, hop over to lettermenrow.com if you want more of Mick and some of me, because there's a lot of our written work there. So that's more like writing stuff than talking stuff, but it's fun either way. We have a good time, and we'd love to see you there. For Mick Walker, I'm Jeremy Birmingham. This has been Talking Stuff. Have a great weekend, everybody. We will see you on this show next week. Goodbye.